Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are starting a brand new book at this point, or in this video. We are going to be doing First Kings.
First Kings.
Yeah. So, First Kings is, the beginning of chapter 1 of First Kings is really the midpoint of 4 books.
Right.
1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings were originally 2 books. And then split into 4 books called the Books of the Kingdoms, and then eventually the first 2 got named Samuel, and the second 2 just got named Kings because that's as we work our way through, it'll be pretty obvious
because they didn't ask you when it should be named. Well, it's kind of cool, right? First and Second
midpoint.
Samuel really take over the first 2 kings that were in Israel. So it starts with Saul. David's definitely introduced because he's a huge part of Saul's story.
Right.
But then Second
Second
Samuel.
And
it's really funny. The first couple of chapters is about Samuel.
Yeah.
And then you kind of lose him, and he picks back up.
Right.
But each one that ends in the next story just takes place.
Just roll.
It's
like a 4-volume set.
Exactly.
Really is what we have. So we're at the midpoint of this 4-volume set when we start First Kings, and the background is David is at the end of his reign, basically, and we'll see that he's sick and old, and he's going to need a successor, and that's really where First Kings picks up.
Yeah, well, and he's been a great king for Israel.
Yeah,
I mean, a huge king. So he's been with God his whole life.
Yeah.
And when we were in First and Second Samuel, you could see the difference between him and Saul.
Oh, yeah.
Where Saul was like, if he can't fix it, I guess I'll go to God as a last resort.
Yeah.
David's like, let's start with God and work our way out.
Right.
And we just keep seeing this over and over, but that doesn't mean he was perfect. He had a bunch of missteps. I would say more in his family life.
And we're actually going to continue seeing that.
Exactly. And that's why I'm bringing it up, right? So we, he's a man after God's heart, or God's after, his heart. But we kind of gloss over that he was an adulterer and a murderer, which seemed like pretty big failings.
Yeah.
But we're at the point where, like you said, he's so old. He's cold now all the time. They assign a nurse to him, which is the same way that First and Second Samuel, they'll introduce a character and not say much about him, and then that person will show up later.
A little bit, yeah,
which is kind of funny.
If this weren't the Bible, if this were just literary drama,
it's good writing.
It's good writing. Yeah, we're going to introduce this character here because they're going to show up.
But he did have an affair with Bathsheba. Later, they married.
Yeah,
and they had a son, and the son was Solomon, and he's going to play a prominent role here.
Yeah. So the key thing is that David had promised Bathsheba that Solomon would be the king. And we sort of need that piece of information as we come into chapter 1, is because that was the promise. That was his plan all along. Solomon will be his successor. Yeah,
he just didn't tell many more people than that, it seems. But also because he committed adultery and sinned against God, God said something along the lines of that the sword will never depart from your house.
Yeah.
And so we've already seen David's first son revolt against him, and he ends up dying, and we'll see other sons too.
Yeah, well, and part of this is not just that the sword wouldn't leave his house, but he just was not a good dad.
Yeah,
as far as teaching his sons and whatever. From a family perspective, fine, the sword is never going to leave your house, but you think that you'd be able to mitigate that somewhat. And some of this, the stuff that we see going on with Absalom and Amnon, so Amnon's the first son, Absalom's the second son. There's a third son that's just mentioned once, doesn't show up again at all. Now we've got the fourth son, and he's trying to jump over. And then Solomon's later. You got all this stuff, and none of them, not a single one of them, including Solomon, followed David's pattern, the way that the way that David chased God. So.
Right. And us being dads, of course, our kids are perfect.
Well, of course,
yeah. So David's old. He hasn't given up the reign to anyone else. And one of his sons decided, well, I should be king. Now, there's some precedents for that, right? The first son is not there, so this is the second son. And it's Adonijah.
Adonijah.
Yeah. Right, Adonijah. So he got chariots, he got horsemen, he got 50 people to be his, quote, royal guard.
Entourage,
Yeah, I got a group. and he had some of the priests supporting him, but he didn't have some of the other key players that he really needed. He didn't have the key warriors, right? He didn't have the army.
So David's, they were called his 30 elite warriors, right?
Yep.
His personal, guys, didn't have them.
Yep. Only had part of the priests.
Right, but not the high priest.
Yep, and didn't have the prophet.
Nathan the prophet. So if you don't have the prophet, you don't have the priest, and you don't have the elite guard,
you're on the outside, yeah. Right. You got a chance because you got to get the people on your side.
But the thing is, he didn't have God on his side. So
okay, maybe that one.
That even if he did have all the rest of, but I mean, to not have the prophet and priest, the high priest. Right. I mean, automatically that tells you that you're headed in the wrong direction, right? But then Adonijah's not chasing God either.
Right. I like that you brought up just the feel for the book, because definitely in this section you can feel the tension between everybody.
Yeah.
So the sides are split, and there's political action going on, which also adds to the drama.
Yeah.
Bathsheba goes to visit her husband, and has to have a special invitation.
And,
and all that. But she got David to say that Solomon should be the next king.
That's the promise that I made to you.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay, we got that out of the way, and now Nathan steps in. Okay, I heard that. Now we can start doing some things.
Yeah.
So you have Solomon as David's new king. You have the prophet. You have the priests. You have God on that side. You have the elite warriors. But now, is it going to be a fight? Because now you have to address the issue.
Yeah.
So they actually, Solomon went on a donkey, which has some interesting connotations too.
Yeah.
Everybody else was on horses. My understanding, usually if the king or a person came in on a horse, it was considered to be a military exercise,
right?
With a war effect. But coming in on a donkey signified peace.
Yeah.
And I come in, more of a godly fashion and orderly fashion.
And even the king on a donkey, was that
so it was David's donkey,
right? Yeah. So think of how Jesus came into Jerusalem on a donkey as well, right?
Yeah,
not coming as a son of David, just like Solomon, coming in.
Yeah, exactly. So Solomon is anointed king. Okay, you gotta say his name one more time. Sorry.
Adonijah.
That's not hitting. Adonijah and his guests heard all the commotion, which was hilarious to me. What's going on? When they actually understood what was going on, the guests, the Bible says, panicked.
Well, because at this little, soiree here, this little gathering, Adonijah was taking names. Who's on my,
Right.
you are invited
You're
here because you're on my side,
that.
setting up his cabinet, the whole thing, and all of a sudden, he's not king.
Yeah, we have a new king, and the people in the street are celebrating.
And I just swore my allegiance to you, so now what's going to happen to me?
Right.
So they're like...
So Adonijah goes to the altar and grabs the horns on the altar.
Yeah.
So what does that signify?
So it's called the sanctuary, and there is precedent for going to the sanctuary of whatever God. This isn't just Israel. This is you do this in other cultures, because basically you're seeking refuge and mercy from the God. Maybe the God can protect me from the king type thing. Whoever's against me. So he runs, even though he hasn't really, chasing God. He runs to the altar, he grabs a hold of
home base.
Yeah, exactly. I'm safe. And basically is begging for his life, pleading for mercy.
Right.
And we'll actually see that show up again.
Okay. Yeah.
Somebody else does that in a couple of chapters too.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work the second time. And so that part is kind of put on hold, but it's definitely not finished. So we get into chapter 2. David, like we said, is close to death, and he's giving his last wishes to Solomon. All right, here's what I want you to do.
Yeah.
And when you're reading it, notice, David starts out with God. He's still with God. Whole life he kept God's first. He says, do the job the Lord your God assigned to you.
Yeah.
Just that's all you got to do is do your job. And he's telling Solomon to follow God. And like you said, not going to happen, but... maybe it was too late in life to give him those instructions.
Yeah, but. He's tying in the Davidic covenant and stuff to it.
And, that was the second point I had. Yeah, so David's tying in the Davidic covenant here, saying, look, it's promised to me that there'll be somebody from my line on the throne as long as we stay right with God.
Yeah.
So you need to stay right with God.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as Solomon talks with God, God will say the same thing a couple of different times. If you continue to obey, if you stay right with me, I'll do all this stuff for you.
Right. Right. So then he tells Solomon, hey, treat this guy nicely, right? This guy helped me out, and I want you to treat him nicely.
Yeah.
And then it gets a little bit dark.
Yeah, a couple other guys.
Right. There's a couple other guys. I promised I wouldn't kill them. So I want you to do what you think is right, but don't wait too long.
This section, every time I read the section, it takes me back to like the Godfather.
I thought so, but I didn't want to put it in. But yeah.
Well, part of it is because this guy's name, verse 7, Barzillai, it always reminds me of Barzini.
Yeah, Barzini.
the crime family of Barzini. Yeah. And you got the Godfather, Don Corleone. Is talking about my friends. You keep your friends closer, your enemies closer, and you got. I mean, this is David's like. You need to make him an offer you can't refuse.
Right.
Do all this stuff. And then there's the Barzinis in here.
Yeah. So David passes away. He's reigned for 40 years. Part of it was in different places, but he's reigned for 40 years, which is awesome. And what a long time for a king to reign. Yeah. And he's really set up the kingdom too, which is the cool part. As part of the Davidic covenant, before the Davidic covenant, David says to God, I want to build you a house. Yeah. And God flips it around as part of the Davidic covenant. I'm going to build you a dynasty, type of thing, which is way cool. So David started accumulating money and things, and he accumulated more land and made treaties and made it safe. Not that Solomon didn't have to do anything, right? But it's amazing.
He really did a lot of the prep work for Solomon. Right. One more thing I'll point out here as we're transitioning from David into Solomon is that in case anybody's wondering, well, I thought Solomon was already king, how is David still? Because it's very common in ancient cultures to do what's called a co-regency. We see this several times in the Bible where both the king and the crown prince, father and son, are reigning at the same time. What it does is it gives the new king some credibility, some time to get up to speed, some practice, whatever. While the old king, it's not like he's retired or anything. He's just not quite part of day-to-day ops. But Solomon could go to David, who's probably bedridden based on chapter 1, and just say, okay, what about this? What about this? You know all this stuff. You've been doing this for 40 years. What do you know that I don't know? Right. So that I can do this. And they did that for about 2 years before David died. So of David's 40-year reign and Solomon's 40-year reign, about 2 of those probably were overlapping. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so there's a visit with Bathsheba. The guy I can't pronounce.
Adonijah.
I'm just going to point to you. Sorry. I have I got a brain malfunction here.
Names are hard. I mean, names, and, so it's, by the way, his name means, the J-A-H at the end is Yah, short for Jehovah, right? God's covenant name. Adonai is just Lord or Master. So his name literally is Jehovah is Master.
Okay.
Jehovah is
Lord.
That
I can remember.
Yeah, see, there you go.
So Jehovah
even though
is
he's not living it that way, right?
Right. So he visited Bathsheba, which is a little weird. That's Solomon's mother. Yeah. And asks for a request, and he wants to have a bride. Mm-hmm. And so Bathsheba goes to Solomon with the request, and this guy seems to be playing it low, right? Like he's not stirring the pot or anything.
Doesn't seem like
probably kept a low profile. And Solomon,
because if he didn't keep a low profile, Solomon was going to have him off.
Right. But Solomon is instantly mad.
Yeah.
And when you're reading it, it's like, I'm missing something here. And so what's the piece I'm missing?
Well, the woman that he asked for was this nurse that was helping David. Right. And it's really specific in chapter 1 that David didn't sleep with her. She was a virgin. She was young. She was beautiful, but he didn't sleep with her. But she would have been considered part of his harem, right? Even though, they didn't do anything. Yep. Well, when Adonijah asked to marry her, when you take over from a new king and you take the harem, part of taking the harem is this basically shoving it in the other guy's face. I've got your women, I've got your whatever. So by asking for her, even though technically they didn't do anything, officially she was part of the harem, and
that would have definitely caused future problems.
Definitely.
He could have used that as a launching point for some kind of coup.
It's exactly what Absalom did with some of David's concubines, and so he was about ready to pull the same thing. And Solomon, saw through the whole
wisdom.
We start to see this wisdom early on.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. And we'll see the wisdom he asked for is sometimes different than the wisdom we
We
think
usually
it is.
think of, yeah. And David will call him. He says, "You're a young man. You're wise already." And so something like this is just proof that he's already seeing. He sees things differently than most people do.
So I think one of the big things is anytime a new king takes over, there's old business that has to be finished up, and that's what he was doing with David.
Yeah.
And then there's also securing. The new person has to secure control over the kingdom.
Yep.
And this is exactly what's happening. So Solomon has him killed.
Yep.
And then he had some other people that sided with him at the same time. We're reading it one after another. This could have happened over time.
Yeah.
But the priest that sided with him was removed, and the interesting part of that is that, with a little side note, he seemed to be the family of Eli. So we got to go all the way back to 1 Samuel, where there's God puts, I guess we would call it a curse on the family, saying, your whole family's going to end.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it'd definitely be out of the priesthood. So this was like the last priest from Eli's family. What's interesting, though, is that he was faithful to David for a long time, Abiathar. And so Solomon didn't have him killed. He just put him into forced retirement, basically. Yeah. You're removed from the priesthood. You're not doing this anymore, but I'll let you live in honor of my dad.
Yeah. So there's another guy.
Well, and the work, you were in honor
and the
of
work
God,
that you've done.
Yeah.
So there's another guy that Solomon said, okay, you're done. You have to stay in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
I need you to agree. You understand this. You stay in Jerusalem. I let you live. You leave Jerusalem. I'm going to think you're up to bad things, and I'm going to have you killed.
Yeah. Basically, Jerusalem was his prison.
Do you agree? Yep. 3 years later, the guy leaves.
Yep.
Now, he had to, there were some horses or there's some kind of right, exactly. Yeah. Some kind of livestock that he was trying to get back. Didn't matter. He left.
Solomon had him killed. Yeah, he agreed to the thing. This is your prison for the rest of your life.
And I love the end of the chapter. It says Solomon took control of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Right. He got rid of some opposition. He's wiping the slate clean.
Yep.
He's cleaned up everything that David asked him to do, and now he can move forward with his reign.
Yep.
Chapter 3. It's amazing to me how much is in this chapter, and how much we have to infer too.
Yeah.
But it's big. So Solomon makes a political alliance by marrying Pharaoh's daughter. To me that's awesome.
Number one, that's awesome. But there's so much in.
That's what that's what I mean. So we get one statement, and then when you start peeling the onion back, it's like whoa, because Egypt. So I looked up on a map. Egypt's about 500 miles away from Jerusalem. That's pretty far.
Yeah.
Why would they make this kind of political alliance? And then you read in here, David expanded Israel to Egypt's border.
Yeah.
So Israel and Egypt are on the border of each other. So you have Israel, that you think this small nation is really a large regional power.
Yeah.
Going against Egypt, who used to be the world power,
world empire,
but it's on its way down.
Yep.
Now making an alliance with each other, and it's Egypt.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So what happened there 500 years ago?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. When they came out of
exactly.
the Exodus. What's also interesting is that, and this is not a misogynistic thing, but whoever gave up their daughter was the weaker nation.
Was that the?
Yeah.
Because they were the one trying to make the alliance.
Exactly. So historically, the strong nation had the son who made alliances by marrying the daughters of these four and these other nations, and they made their political alliances. And historically, Egypt almost never did that. They were always, to this point, they were always in the strong position.
Right.
This is like the first time in world history where Pharaoh's giving his daughter away, and it's to Israel, and it just shows how much Israel is over Egypt at this time.
Yeah, so we get that from one sentence.
Yeah, and history.
It's more than that, but but I mean,
world,
the whole thing. That's what I mean. It's jam packed with things.
Yeah.
We also learned that the temple hasn't built yet. This was a huge building project at Solomon, based on David's instructions. So David said, "I want to build a place for the ark." God turns it around. Now we have the Davidic covenant. But as part of that, he also said, "Your son's going to build me a place where I live," and that's where the temple is.
Right.
So Solomon actually has a dream, and in that dream, God says to him, tell me what I should give you. And I love the way it's worded too. And I think it's important the way it's worded. This isn't a wish.
Right.
And God also doesn't say he's going to give it to him. God just says, tell me what I should give you.
Yeah.
Right. To me, that says, I want to see how smart you are. I want to see how much you understand things.
Yep.
If I was to give you something, what would you want?
What would it be? Yeah.
A new pony. It's not a wish. It's not $1 million. It's not this.
Right.
And Solomon, like we said, already had wisdom, but he was as he's now king, he is responsible for being the judge.
Yeah.
So people can come to him with their problems, and he has to discern
Final
who's
arbitrator.
right, who's wrong. And so he says he asked God for a discerning mind to make judicial decisions.
Yeah.
So that's the wisdom he's asking for.
Yeah, he's not asking for wisdom in every area of life. But the fact that he asked for that already shows that there's some wisdom there.
Right.
And so what God said was, Solomon said, these are your people. I want to make decisions wisely on your behalf, on their behalf, type thing. And so I think God granted not just judicial wisdom, but expanded on the wisdom he already had, and everything.
Yeah, he got the double bonus.
Right. In addition to all the stuff he didn't ask for.
Yeah.
And
he got
was-
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Is there a bigger takeaway here? What do we take away from
Well, I
this?
think the takeaway is not ask God for wisdom and you'll get everything that your little heart desires.
So praying to God, I need $1 million, probably isn't the best,
Right.
the best thing to pray.
Right. But also praying to God, please give me wisdom, hoping that he'll give me $1 million, right? It worked for Solomon. But I wonder if James had this passage in mind in James chapter 1 when he said, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, because God gives liberally, generously, to those who ask. Because it's the wisdom of living in wisdom. And but I think there is enough in Scripture that says when we live wisely, we're going to have a better life.
So I don't know. So is the prayer, God give me wisdom, or God give me wisdom for whatever the specific situation that you're in?
Yeah, for this one, he asked for a specific situation. For James, he just said, if you lack
Ask for wisdom.
Yeah. Now, even that was a specific situation because the Jewish Christians were dealing with persecution and everything, and so that was the context. If any of you lacks wisdom, how to live out this situation. But so, do you ask for a lifetime of wisdom, or do you ask for wisdom in every situation? I think it's yes. I think it's both and.
Yeah, probably the most famous story with Solomon in it is in this last chapter too.
Yeah.
So we got to at least talk about it a little
Yeah,
bit.
right. Yeah. No.
And then I ask that you go back to maybe the first time you read it, right? Because that's when it's like the lightning bolt kind of hits. But two prostitutes come in with a baby. Both of them claim that it's theirs, and that the other person's baby has died.
Right.
That's it. Solomon has to make a choice, right? So
There's no blood test. You're not doing DNA.
It's not
genetic
who does the baby look like even probably
right.
doesn't help. So Solomon has to figure it out, and what he says is he makes a flippant comment. Let's get a sword guy in here. Let's cut the baby in half, and we'll give each half to each baby. Obviously, I don't think he meant it. But some kings probably would have done that in the past, and what it did was it stirred up the maternal instincts in the mom,
The real mom,
who said, "Oh, no, I give up my half. I just want the baby to live."
Yep.
Meanwhile, the other lady says,
Sounds
whatever.
fair to me.
Yeah. So Solomon, of course,
okay.
took orders, right. So one of the things was that there didn't seem to be punishment for the lady who was lying, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't say that there was any punishment, but it's like, why are you wasting the king's time with this or whatever? There definitely could be punishment, but
Not everything's in there.
But not everything's in here, right? I mean, there's so much. We're getting such a small snapshot of each of these things, and this was just an illustration. Just to show his wisdom and everything.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's so much that we don't get in the Bible, and I mean it's just a good thing that we need to remember when we're reading the Bible is we don't get everything. It's not like we have to fill in the blanks, but some of it, beginning of chapter 3, it's good to know world history so that we can do some of that stuff. So, but that brings us to the end of our section anyway here.
Right.
So
right, good place to stop.
I'd say it's a great place to stop. There's a lot more to come. we've still got a lot to go. We're only a seventh of the way through the book, so we have some time to watch this unpack. There's 22 chapters. Oh, by the way,
we're on King 3.
Yeah, right.
Of 40.
First Kings is interesting because it's really easy to outline. There are 22 chapters. The first 11 have to do with Solomon, and then he dies, and the second 11 start the divided kingdom. So we have, it's pretty easy to remember. Yeah. So send your questions and comments. We always love those. Let us know what you find interesting as well. Subscribe and share this with people that you think could benefit from this. And we will see you back here next time.